Recording in progress.
I think most people are connected. You right to start, Lisa?
Yeah, all good to go. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Firstly, thank you for your attendance to the forum meeting. All of you familiar faces and your commitment, ongoing commitment to our kaupapa. No mai hara mai. We're going to get straight into it today. I'll do a karakia to open up our forum hui and then introduce our kaupapa and our speakers. So kia ora tātou, te atua nei rā mātou inoi atu ki a koe. Hei te timatanga o tēnei hui huinga. Me te kaupapa I mui a tātou. Mātou nau e te aki ana tō mātou nei taiao, no reira me manaki ia mai mātou I roto I tēnei kaupapa, ara hina mai mātou I roto I a mātou whakaro me a mātou nei kōrero me tuku tō aroha ki runga I te tātou katoa I roto I tēnei kaupapa I tēnei rangi. Ho mai tō manakitanga kia tātou katoa I ngā Waikato, mātou inoi atu ki a koe I roto I tō ingoa tapu ake āmeni. Kia ora tātou, welcome to our forum presentation. And our kaupapa, protecting our precious Moana. As always, we have a lineup of esteemed speakers, very knowledgeable people in this kaupapa, in this field. Chris Battershill, Mark Whitworth, Sham, Baldeo, and Abigail Robinson. I'm guessing by the run sheet that Chris will be going first. Once again, welcome to everybody. I'm sure most of you know Mr. Chris Battershill, Professor Chris Battershill from Waikato University. The kaupapa of his talk today is legless marine aliens. And we'll get straight into it. Welcome, Chris. No mai hara mai. Good to have your presence again and your knowledge. I'll pass it over to you to open up. So kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora tātou, kia ora everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'll just share the screen. And hopefully bringing that up to okay, can you all see that without the notes? They're projecting okay, and you can hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, kia ora. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Toihuera Takatai, or the Coastal Chair, based here in Tauranga, Moana, with the University of Waikato. And I'm going to backdrop a little bit of the work that we are doing on legless marine aliens, and how they work, how they actually invade. And these are the encrusting marine invertebrates and seaweeds. So we're going to sort of look at the invasive species that are everything except the crabs and the fishes and other organisms. And when we're talking about marine invasive invertebrates that and seaweeds that cover surfaces, we're really talking about space invaders. So they become a problem because they're very, very efficient at invading already occupied space that might be occupied by a native species, or by invading space that has been newly generated from new infrastructure like wharfs and the like that have just been put in, or after accidents. And the Rena shipwreck, for instance, just off our coast was prime example of where you have disturbance and the potential for marine invasions of invertebrates that are going to cover rocks and the surfaces. So the usual suspects here are just the, I guess, the 4 or so main ones: Undaria, or the Japanese seaweed, the Mediterranean fatting worm, fortunately held at bay by the brilliant surveillance and activities here in Tauranga, Moana, by the Regional Council, the Port and Niwa. A series of colonial sea squirts, particularly this one, Eudostoma, that can grow extremely quickly and occupy very large surfaces. And then, of course, there's the club tunicate. So these are the sorts of organisms that are enormously aggressive. And when they get out of control, they can occupy vast areas. So in behind that green wall there, that's the invasive sea squirt. In behind that wall of animal life used to be a sea pen for salmon. It grew so quickly and so fast, it stopped water flow, and all the salmon inside of that sea pen perished. And then, of course, you have these Mediterranean sea fans. This from a hull that's been pulled out, and as we would have heard in the previous session, they can tend to fall out of their tubes and repropagate. The Mediterranean fans are particularly damaging if they get in amongst mussel aquaculture. They eat 7 times more efficiently than a mussel will. So if they're on any sort of reef or an aquaculture line and amongst mussels, they'll outcompete them. And how marine invaders or how marine encrusting species actually live and survive is that they use chemical weaponry to either create space if it's already occupied, or to overgrow existing organisms. And here you can see a coral, 2 corals battling it out. The one that's coming from underneath is killing off the brain coral on the top there, and you can see a zone of necrosis or death where the exudates, the chemical weapons are killing off the host, and it will overgrow it. And in the other picture down on the right-hand corner is a sponge doing exactly the same thing to a coral. So marine invertebrates in particular, and some of the more invasive seaweeds have a chemistry that is very, very aggressive, and it allows compete other things. Now, some of you will have seen this image before, and I just put it up again to demonstrate that marine chemistry can be very flexible. The organisms involved can attune the chemical structures so that they can either kill everything that they want to kill and overgrow it and occupy all the space, or in this case, they can form a bit of a standoff interaction, because some of the chemistry is such that it'll denature or stop whatever's growing over it. As you can see with that little green sea squirt in the middle, the little didenum, and it's holding off that sarcophyte and soft coral. So it's looking at the sort of the chemical ecology or the nature of the chemical interactions of these encrusting marine invertebrates and algae, particularly the aggressive ones that we don't want, the invaders. Looking at how they use that chemistry can provide us with clues on how to either mitigate it or stop them altogether. So this is in the realm, and I've touched on this before in one of the previous talks I've given to this group of marine biodiscovery. It is looking at chemical leads from marine organisms for all sorts of outcomes, including agrochemical and medicinal, and we'll touch on a bit of that in this talk. So there's a lot of applications for these marine natural products, as they're called, or these bioactives from marine sources. And an area which has really been underplayed are agrochemicals. And I'll touch on that just briefly as a quick aside, because it does relate to bioinvasions and biosecurity. But not listed in this diagram are applications associated with biosecurity and biomaterials in particular in the marine domain, and anti-fouling paints, which is where we're heading in this quick overview. So what we're interested in doing is harnessing the marine chemistry. It's called allelochemistry, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. We're interested in harnessing that to provide solutions for surfaces that are in marine waters that are likely to stop marine invasives getting in and getting a foothold in the first place. So we're looking for naturally inspired anti-fouling, to move away from the traditional anti-fouling chemicals that have been used in the past, like tributyl tin, and that's now been banned, of course, but there are a lot of organic and inorganic replacements which are equally harmful to the environment when they come off the paint as they're leached off paint systems. So the term allelochemistry has really come from a terrestrial environment where allelopathy is well known in between plants that are interacting with one another. You'll often see, if you're in a canopy, if you look upwards, you'll see the canopy plants from different trees often have a space between them. And it's because the leaves are often interacting with trees or different species around them. But much of what goes on in terms of the plants on land's ability to live with one another or not is happening in around the root systems, and particularly the microbes. And the microbes talk to one another. The bad ones, however, that tend to take over, have a way of switching off the natural balancing mechanisms of the good microbes. And that process is called quorum sensing. It's where these organisms are sensing the presence of one another, and the pathogenic ones are able to switch that sensing system off so that it stops the natural defenses are happening. Now, I'll just diverge a little bit because this gives you an idea of sort of the pathway of investigation that we're traveling down, heading towards marine anti-fouling paints. But this is a story about the biodiscovery of a treatment for another biosecurity issue. And it came from looking at, this is a student of ours, Jamie Summerfield, when I was in Australia. This is University of Western Australia. And Jamie was looking at marine leads that would interact with Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is a lung disease. And what Pseudomonas aeruginosa does is it switches off the natural ability of our own defensive microbial system to confront it, to stop it happening. So it's a quorum sensing modifying pathogen. And we found a bunch of marine leads that managed to interact with that pathogen, with Pseudomonas, and turn it off. So an effective treatment that meant that Pseudomonas, the lung disease pathogen, wasn't going to develop any resistance. And that's exactly what the medicinal people wanted. And a number of those leads, we found quite a few of them actually from the marine source, came from seaweeds. Now, of course, in this country, when I first arrived back into Aotearoa and came to Tauranga, PSA was a big issue, and it happens to be a Pseudomonas pathogen as well. And so we immediately thought, well, we might be able to find an answer for that. And at the time, Zespri was interested in quorum sensing modifying defenses, once again, for PSAV, such that pathogen wasn't able to develop a workaround or resistance to whatever treatment it was. So we were able to harness the medicinal database that we had from marine species right through to molecules and their modes of action, and did that effectively, and have come up with a number of marine biologicals, bioactive compounds that do absolutely the same thing as they did in the human lung disease. So it demonstrated that we can very quickly find marine compounds that are used in defensive systems in the marine environment and map them into other areas, other sectors. And in this case, it was an agrochemical sector looking at a biosecurity issue, PSAV. So the mode of action of that compound is actually quite similar in terms of where it interacts with pathogens, in terms of what we're looking for as a solution for anti-fouling surfaces and things. So the successional ecology of biofouling systems that lead to invasives getting in starts off with creation of biofilms, tertiary and secondary and tertiary colonizers, and then the species, arguably things that we don't want. And this is right at the end, macroscopic fouling communities, and it happens that our bioinvading species outcompete the natives. They do better. So if we can stop that process further down the chain in the biofilm stage by using some of the natural marine antibiotics, for instance, then we're moving along to having surfaces that can actually preclude invasion of some of these legless aliens in the first place. So interfering with the biofouling successional strategy has a number of points at which we can interact with whatever surface that we're wanting to look at, and apply some antibiotics into biofilms and various formulations onto those surfaces, ideally to stop the process of a biofilm that is conducive to having barnacles and undaria and these invasive ascidians settling on it. So we don't want to ever get to stage 4B, where the larger organisms, the larger invaders get in. Now, it just so happens that if we go back to looking for clues as to where we might find some of these species that generate anti-fouling compounds, if we have a look at the medicinal chemistry that we've developed over the years from drug discovery programs, we find that most of the compounds from marine organisms that are immunosuppressive, that switch off the ability of other things to have an immune response or an antagonistic response to them, are from alien or bioinvading species. These have use, of course, in immunological research for heart transplants and things, because it switches off the natural immune defensive systems. But the reason that these compounds work is because they come from organisms in the sea that want to switch off the defenses of things they're settling on, usually native species, and they do that very well. So based on those sorts of observations, there's now a number of discoveries that have been made out there, and I won't go through these in any great detail, just to give you an idea of what's really coming in terms of solutions. And here are some activities, indoles from marine species, including marine fungi, that have anti-fouling activity on biofilm forming species. So these sorts of compounds, as you can see in the picture of paint applications, these are for ship hulls and surfaces and around wharfs and things like that. You can have a look at the control on that picture of all of the different sort of copper colored plates. The control in the top left, it's got algae growing all over it, but all the others have nothing, and they've been treated with various compounds from marine fungi. If you have a look at fouling algal species, so things like the invasive Japanese seaweed, just compounds from, this is a New Zealand species of seaweed, Baldeo pulchra, can knock out the spores that settle onto surfaces right at the settlement process at quite low concentrations. You can have a look at about 100 nanograms per mil. It can knock out settling undaria and things like that. And from sponges, there's a bunch of natural products that can actually knock out the settlement process of things like barnacles and unwanted black or blue mussels. So those sorts of things are out there. And there's some very exciting activities now coming through from some more recent publications, looking, for instance, at the toxins that are in nudibranchs, and you can milk these. You don't have to kill the nudibranch, surprisingly, and you embed them into a bunch of polymers. These are smart surfaces, so that under certain light conditions, the toxins can be activated, and then under different light conditions, they can be deactivated. So here you have a system, for instance, if it was painted onto a ship's hull, came into a harbour, you could pass a UV 254 nanometer UV light under the ship, and it would activate the anti-fouling activities then and there. And then as the ship left, you could deactivate them so that paint lasts for a very long period of time. Super sophisticated materials that are starting to come through. So all sorts of opportunities are here. And here's some of the panels that have been painted by that UV activated lamp. And you see towards the right-hand side that has these nudibranch compounds in them. There's no fouling whatsoever on those. So the sorts of paint formulations that can be developed are self-polishing paints, hard paints, and thin film paints. And obviously what we're looking for are compounds that can be embedded into the paint so that they are not polished off, so that they last for very long periods of time. We don't want to be losing, even though they're natural compounds, we don't want to be losing these toxins to the environment. So that's what's going on. And so there's now formulations and a great deal of activity with interest in these marine bioactives from the invasive species themselves, actually, to incorporate into new paints, but also some new technology where some of these compounds can actually be incorporated into the filaments for nets and things like that. So it becomes a biomaterial that is active in its own place. At a larger scale, and Carlton's very interested in this, and has initiated a program in Tauranga Moana, and that's looking at living seawalls. Seawalls that are designed with a certain architecture, a certain microtopography that will actually, in addition to being anti-fouling for the unwanted species, encourage native species into these areas so that there's an additional wall of mouths that can eat the larvae and spores of some of the potential alien species coming in on ships. So picking up the Space Invaders theme again, that I used to play a lot of, probably spent most of my youth on that game, got quite high too as well. It's game over, well, it's at the talk over. Certainly not game over for looking at these discoveries and adapting them. So we now have points that we can impact on the biofouling process all the way through, including to the larger eukaryotes. And then there is now discovery of marine biomaterials based on marine chitin, thin films, and you can get this off the surfaces of mussels, for instance, that are naturally anti-fouling due to their microtopography. They also have some interesting chemistry in there. One other thing to leave you with, which is pretty cool, I think, and that is colleagues in Japan, particularly Nobuhiro Fusutani from the University of Tokyo, has found an anti-fouling solution for the large eukaryotes, particularly barnacles. And how a barnacle settles is that on the nose of its larvae, they have effectively a two-pot adhesive mix, kind of like the araldite that you need to have two different solutions to mix together, and then it creates a cement. And that's how barnacles can settle onto rocks and surfaces. They have a cement that you need both glands to produce these enzymes. That when together, they stick the barnacle onto whatever surface it is. So what Professor Fusutani's done is found a compound that stops that fixing process. It stops the two-pot mix actually fixing itself. And so the barnacle larvae called cyprids can just be washed off. So there's some pretty neat things coming our way. And we're involved in that. So that's the backdrop to it. This is a student. She's just finished with us, with Charlie, excuse me, Charles and myself, Sher Fedlin, just finished her master's, and she's having a look at the bioactive chemistry of native versus non-native sea squirts in Tauranga Moana here, and has already come up with a number of compounds and modes of action that we can apply in some of the formulations that I've just discussed. So that's it for me. It's a very fast flight over quite a large topic area, but I hopefully have given you a little bit of insight into what's coming our way with regard to protection of our marine surfaces inside harbours in particular. Kia ora. Oh, Carlton, you're muted, I think.
Sorry about that. Before any burning questions, Chris, thank you so much again for your sharing your internationally renowned knowledge and your perseverance with this kaupapa over the years. We're privileged to have you on board supporting TNBC and supporting Tauranga Moana with these issues. And looking forward to catching up very shortly around some of these issues. It takes me back when you talked about PSA. For those out there that are involved in projects looking at the worth or the value of engaging Mātauranga Māori, I recall myself mooting that from a Mātauranga perspective, the answer to PSA and many other diseases was in the Moana, and a solution created from the Moana to battle those diseases. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resource to investigate that from a Mātauranga perspective, but we'll get there, I'm sure, especially with Chris's help. So is there any questions there for Chris from our audience? Like usual, they've probably all got 10 each, a bit shy. But everyone knows where Chris is based at the field station most of the time at Sulphur Point, and please do take the time out to engage with Chris if you're looking at going down this road or advancing your own knowledge around these sorts of things. Please engage with Chris, because he's the best. My whakaaro, he's the best we have in the country, and we're lucky to have him here situated in Tauranga, Moana. So
I might just throw a mihi to Yannicka, Carlton. I know she's probably due to share her work, but her mahi was central to, I think, a lot of the stuff that Sher has now done.
Yeah. And as Chris said, we've got a lot of students from Tauranga doing their degrees in this field, and they need to be supported and better acknowledged, and need the ability to share their knowledge as well and their work. And these forums are the place for it. TMBC is the place for it. So yeah, thanks again, Chris. We'll move on to our next speaker, and we hope to see you soon, Chris.
Me too, Carlton.
Thank you very much. Next on the list was Mark Whitworth. An update on the Port Excellence program, and I'm sure Mark's got some interesting updates. So kia ora, Mark. No mai hara mai. The floor is yours.
Kia ora, Carlton. Hi, Mark Whitworth. I'm the Port's lead in the Biosecurity Excellence program, and we'll just go and share that screen. That's active for everybody. Cool. So the Biosecurity Excellence program has its genesis back a number of years, but the goal around it is having a port community committed to that biosecurity excellence, and it's about raising that awareness. It's around using the port in conjunction with MPI and KVH to harness the knowledge that everybody has, and utilize that knowledge. The Excellence program started back in February 2016. We were fortunate at the time to get the then Minister of Agriculture involved, and we had a big launch. You can see from the slide that quite an auspicious start to the program, but again ably supported by our partners back in the day. We've progressed and learned a lot of things along the way, and how we developed the program has developed as we've learnt some things along the way. We've made some mistakes, but we've just built on some of those mistakes as we've moved forward. One of the key things that we've driven from day one, and it's morphed through into the Tauranga Moana Biosecurity Capital, is the theme of having a biosecurity week. So we've used that through the Excellence program to get down to the grassroots. One of the key things and one of the key planks of the Excellence program was to utilize those staff that are working every day on the port handling the cargo to be the initial eyes to sort out these biosecurity risks. But we've had to give them the tools along the way to help them. The pest calendars come out at the start of that biosecurity week, so they're quite critical part of that program. So there is quite a bit of support, both internally and externally to them, but again, they also get used to actually verify that someone's found something. And we've got cases where people have referred back to the calendar to go, oh, yes, this is something that that we've found. Key thing that we find, and people laugh when we say this, but morning tea shouts really work. You turn up to the coalface with some morning tea, and you get great engagement with the staff on the ground. As we said, we've learned along the way. You know, very early on, we tried to be all things to everybody, and the slide on the right hand side was pretty early on in the process, where we're actually trying to get out into the community as well and get them engaged. We thought that cruise ship day would be one of the draw cards, and there'll be plenty of people around, and we managed to find someone to get into the Beagle suit. It was a spectacular failure. We just didn't have the reach. We didn't have the knowledge around how to get out of the community. We've all got our day jobs, and so that side of it we let sort of lapse a little bit. And I mean, again, we're fortunate with Tauranga Moana Biosecurity Capital coming along that has got the grunt in that space, and so they've probably picked up a lot of that work outside the port gate, and you know, we continue to link in, and it's allowed us then to focus back onto the port community. We've also tried very successfully to get some profile people in there. You can see in that slide we've had Rude Climb Past and the Bugman, and again, you get great interest from people when you've actually got a story to tell. We then use the resources, and again, we're fortunate to tap into both MPI and KVH and grab some collateral. But you know, the key planks for us have been the calendar. We did try and smarten it up a little bit, and we went to one year we did a wall planner, but we find the calendars work really well. There'll be a few smoko rooms and offices that have got the most unwanted playing cards around. And then the other resource that we use is our wide-ranging network. And so when we have something that we want to share, i.e. a biosecurity alert around start of BMSB season, for example, then we put stuff out through our wide networks. And so we've got that ability to share and promote, but also raise awareness and put information out. We then have used the biosecurity network to share the story across other parts of the industries. You know, we do a stand at the symposium days, but we've also organised some sessions that go from the port right back through the supply chain. In this case, we're privileged to be hosted by James Trevelyan. But it starts at the port, and then it just works backwards to show people where they fit into that supply chain, but also where the biosecurity incursions have them greatest impact if there's something slips through the net from the port initially. So again, what we're promoting is that what impacts at the port then impacts the community. And just not using scare techniques, but you know, just to say to people that you know, potentially their jobs and their livelihoods and the port environment ultimately can be impacted by some form of incursion, and what they do on the ground at the coalface actually does make a difference. We just highlight what the threats are, but also what the potential pathways for those threats coming through. Another plank that we did early on with some of our partners was actually to go out and talk to people, because one of the key things we wanted to understand was, how do we measure success? So it's all very well to put this program in place, but we wanted to know, were we making a difference? And so we used some people through our connections who actually did a survey for us, and we did that over a 6-year period, so we could actually start to measure whether we're making a difference. And so when we get that information back, it starts to drive how we change the program. Again, we don't know what we don't know. And so it's important for us just to continue to evolve this process and meet the needs of what people out there want to understand. And so, you know, it's onwards and upwards. It's not a point that we stand still, although we have matured quite a lot through this pathway. And so now we're sitting at this point going, how do we evolve onwards? And, you know, the key planks are still remain the same, and we'll continue to drive those key planks. But you know, just continue that from that process as we evolve. And again, we're fortunate through all the networks to have a great number of resources. And as we've just seen from Chris, you know, a lot of that science backs the decisions and the improvements as we all do things going forward for this place. And then just, you know, it works alongside the Biosecurity Excellence Program. But again, it's part of the port's commitment, not only through that biosecurity, but also as importantly is that biodiversity outside in that Tauranga Moana environment. And so, you know, through the Ngā Mātarai Charitable Trust, the wetland development, but also the Kai Moana Restoration Project. And, you know, that's critical around our wharf structures and the harbour to understand what's there in amongst the surveys, but also how we can, you know, grow that Pepikura habitat project as well, and make the port and the wharf structures fit for, you know, that biodiversity space. So you know, in summary, we've got to protect what we've got, and you know, that ultimately is having a port community that is committed to biosecurity excellence and working together to prevent that biosecurity risk. And that's the key thing that, you know, we continue to drive and continue to empower people to actually make some decisions. And, you know, we're treading a little bit of a fine line around productivity and keeping the port running, where as opposed to having staff empowered to actually make decisions and stop work when they find something that they think looks suspicious, and to make the right calls and escalate that back through their companies and eventually or ultimately back through to MPI, so that we can get some people on the ground to actually make those decisions. And we are seeing good progress in that space. So that's quite a rapid run through. So thank you, and it's been you know, it's been great to be able to share our story to the wider networks. I'll unshare.
Kia ora, Marcus. Any questions for Mark? Nothing in the chat. Thank you again, Mark. Always look forward to your updates and value the relationship we have through TNBC, and any opportunities that people can get involved in the Port Excellence Program and biosecurity in general when it comes to the port structures, shipping. We all know there's several issues there, but and it's good to see that the port continues to seek advice from MPI and better engagement, better resourcing to deal with some of the biosecurity issues. And I think the likes of Sham also and what he does with MPI and programs into introducing new staff and new schemes to help assist with biosecurity. So kia ora, Mark. Thank you very much again for your update.
Kia ora, Carlton. Thank you.
Forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Kia ora, Tato. If there's no questions there, Mark will move on to Sham and Abigail Robinson from our local MPI team, and give us some updates and maybe carry on some of the discussions from our last forum meeting, and maybe to answer some questions that people had and didn't get to ask. So kia ora, Sham and Abigail. No mai hara mai. The floor's yours, boss.
Kia ora, Carlton. I just wanted to thank Chris for a good start for the foundation of the conversation for this session. As you know, today myself and Abigail are here just to do question and answers on biofiling, but Chris has done a good backdrop about biofiling, what's happening in that industry, and Mark has put together the whole program that's happening on the port and how everything is connected and interrelated, and how do we apply it operationally. So if you don't know, my name is Sham. Baldeo. I'm the team manager for Northern Ports. I look after Auckland Port, Tauranga, Northport, and Opa. And I've got my colleague here, Abigail. I'll get her to introduce and give some background, and would love to answer some of those questions that we didn't get the chance in the previous session. Abigail.
Kia ora, thanks, Sham. Yep, so as Sham said, my name's Abigail Robinson. I'm a senior advisor in the invasive species team. We sit in the Animal and Plant Health Directorate in what is called the pre-border space. So our team's responsible for writing and upholding the standards that are in place to, as a first step, to keep as much risk offshore. And specifically, I mostly work with our biofouling standards or the vessel-related standards, so managing topside risk as well.
Cool. I don't know how we want to start this question and answers, but I do remember from the previous session, there were some questions regarding how we manage the cruise ship and the biofouling decisions and stuff. So from MPI's point of view, we didn't get the chance to jump in and tell you what normally the process is. So what I'll do is I'll just give you a little bit of a drop back, and people can ask question and we'll dive into it. For example, the cruise ship was quite interesting for everyone, and there was a concern, why were these cruise ships being turned around and they're getting clean? So biofouling standard has been in place and in enforcement for 6 years. The only reason everyone got a lot of spotlight is because of public making complaints and concerns about their vessels not coming into those berths, not going to North Ports or coming into Tauranga in timely, and why they're sitting outside 12 nautical mile getting cleaned. So one of the requirements for cruise ship vessel is they need to submit their biofouling documentation, and that's just one part of it. I'll just focus on this part, and that goes to pretty much Abigail's team. They will assess the paperwork, and they'll say if it meets the mark or not. Pre-COVID, they were pretty good, and there was not much issues. But post-COVID, we did have an industry-wide meeting with the cruise ship, highlighting the concerns of biofouling in the vessel sitting around in the world, and what they need to do to meet that requirement. And most companies had a plan, good intentions, how they wanted to go about doing it, and booked their plans and routines and booked their itineraries for their clients, and thought when they're on the way to New Zealand, they'll stop there, get it cleaned, and get it all sorted, and submit the paperwork, and they'll be fine, and they'll just keep going like everything works normal in the world. Some of the examples Abigail can jump in but some of those companies closed down or didn't provide the service properly. They didn't meet MPI standards. And when it came to us, it was quite last minute because, as I said, they were planning to come into New Zealand already. So they thought it was a stop. So by the time they submit the paperwork, they're sailing towards New Zealand. So we had to look at the risk of it and make calls. And as Chris has talked about the layer of filing, we use that and determine where the vessels are appropriate or not. If there's high level of organisms, especially example mussels and oysters, we will not allow the vessels to come in, and we will try to get that addressed. And as you know, vessels that size, there is no dry dock in New Zealand to deal with it. So they normally head out in the waters 12 nautical mile. That's where MPI's jurisdiction ends, and that's where they can carry out the cleaning. MPI doesn't tell them how to address it. They just say there's a risk. This is not permitted into our waters. Please move your vessel out. They will reach out to dive companies to provide that services. Currently, dive companies are not approved by MPI. We're working on the process. Abigail will give you some context that we're working towards. And then the dive company will clean the vessel, provide us with the information. And if we're happy, then we'll allow the vessel back into our waters. So there's several dive companies, different understanding. There's competition amongst them. There's pressure to clean the vessel in a timely manner. As you know, if there's bad weather, they can't clean. Too many vessels there. There's only a few dive companies that can provide service. So there is a lot of challenges and issues for them. And sometimes these companies didn't foresee that. And that's how we went through the season. The season has finished. Summer season for cruise ship just in Auckland finished yesterday. The last cruise ship just left. And I think I'll just give you that backstop, and hopefully it reminds you what you guys were interested in. But Abigail, if you want to give some context as well for people from MPS point of view, anything that I've missed?
Yeah, I mean, you've given most of the overview. Is there any questions at this stage before I kick off?
I've got a couple of three curly ones.
Go for it, Carlton.
That issue. As you've already explained, and as has been explained to me by MPI, most of the time with those vessels, and my real concern is that this isn't going to stop by the looks of it. And my own whakaaro is that we're not hard enough in this country. We received the paperwork and the warnings about these vessels before they come here. Why? Question number one, why are they allowed to come into port and then be told to turn around and go out and get cleaned? Because that is a massive risk to our harbour, even if they're here for minutes. And we're searching for an honest answer to that question. And the second one is, we realise that MPI's jurisdiction stops at the 12-mile limit, but on the 12-mile limit is our two biggest islands, which both have marine reserves on them. It's unacceptable that these ships are cleaning close to or within a risk area of defouling their ships in an area where that biofouling could still make its way to those marine reserves. My third question is, who do we speak to about dealing with those issues?
Okay. Yeah, big questions there. No, so with regards to vessels coming in, as you say, if we know why they allowed in the first place, we're in a position with when a vessel's coming into New Zealand, we also have to weigh up other aspects in terms of
economics,
movement of trade, and safety at sea and all that sort of thing. So on the outside, it might appear really black and white, but when a decision is made, there's a lot going on in the background. Of course, when we make a decision, we base it on the risk we know. So in certain scenarios, a vessel's been allowed in because we don't have at that stage enough information to be able to make a call as impactful as directing a vessel straight out. As I mentioned, there's other aspects at play. So there's scenarios where a vessel comes in and we gather more information. And then once we understand what the actual risk is, that's when we have the grounds to be able to get them out of our harbour. It's not ideal, and you're right. Ideally, we should know before they get here exactly what's going on so that we can hit the brakes on the vessel. But it's not always that black and white. There's a lot of communication that goes on between the vessel's last sort of port and once it's on its way here. So yeah, it's in principle, yes, we would love that. We would love to be able to say, don't even come close. But we are in a position where we do have to facilitate movement, and we can't make a call that big without the justification of knowing exactly what the risk is. So, and a lot of the issues Sham touched on earlier was the cruise ships in particular. We had a lot of problems with their inspection and cleaning providers who they were using to prepare to arrive to New Zealand. So essentially we were not getting enough information in time. And so decisions were made after the arrival because we'd gathered more information on the vessel and then acted accordingly. The other thing to understand is because the vessels, every scenario, so not just cruise vessels, any vessel that comes here that's non-compliant, there's a lot of aspects at play, and also biofouling is never the same. It doesn't present exactly the same for every vessel. So for us to react to the risk accordingly, our decisions are going to appear from the outside quite different from one another. And the other thing to understand, just because a vessel's assessed as non-compliant doesn't necessarily mean it's a really high risk to New Zealand. Quite often there'll be vessels, not talking about cruise vessels here, just any vessels, that are a short stay and they're just over the thresholds, but they have early stage organisms which, sort of at low levels. So we're in a position, as I said, to facilitate trade and movement of vessels, and we have to consider all these aspects. So at the end of the day, it comes down to what we know and can we do what we need to do. And in saying that, with, for example, the cruise vessels, as the situation started to come to light and we started to realize we were dealing with higher risk end, we were very clear with them from the start. We said there's going to be a line you'll hit here, and we're going to be really hard, and you're going to lose access to certain areas or entire areas and things like that. So, and the cruise industry were actually really good about it. They knew where we stood, and they a lot of the time owned up to the fact that it was on them to sort it out. So there was a lot of back and forth going on in the background to sort of work out these situations. So yeah, we are working on improving that information that we get, and we've taken a huge step by proposing a minimum inspection requirement in our standard. And so I've spoken to Lisa, so hopefully soon I'll be able to come back and give a full update on what the new standard is, because I'm at a position where I can't talk about it in detail. But what we proposed was setting a minimum inspection requirement so that MPI doesn't have to keep trying to make decisions with low quality or partial information, because at the moment our standard doesn't really support us in pushing back really heavily on poor information. So that means, Carlton, is that what in essence we can deny a report from way out and say, no, try again. You're not compliant with our standard until we get this right information, which is a huge change from how it's worked in the past. And that's exactly the problem, or part of the problem is actually a whole lot of other issues that this will help solve. But that's part of it, is it stops us from sort of having our hands tied behind our back in that area, and being able to be more responsive and know before they even enter our harbour what's going on. Does that help?
Kia ora. Yep, it does.
Carlton, just on some of the points as well from operational point of view, our regulations require 48 hours prior notification. We encourage all the shipping lines to provide in way in advance. We've set up teams to assess paperwork to help them out. Things have improved in the last 2 to 3 years. And just for your background, we are the only country that enforces at this level of biofiling interns around ship. We are leading the way. And Abigail goes around, and our team goes around international forums talking about biofiling and how we're lifting. We're the first one, and I know the Australians are also coming along and learning from us the challenges and the issues we've faced and how many vessels we've turned around. And Abigail can talk about the others, and the teams have been traveling to talk and improve the standards of it. The shipping line, the Shipping Agent Association is also trying to improve this, make it more clear, black and white, because no one wants to come and clean here, and delays in schedule. There's a lot of impact, and the ports are also partnering up with the MPI and discouraging that you need to be more organized and planned, and don't show up at our ports and muck up the scheduling of the berthing as well, because there's a roll-on effect on everything. So we're getting better at it. We're learning, continuous improvement, more engaging, more awareness. It's something that's in its early stages, and personally, I believe our team and our awareness in our communities are leading the way. If you go around, and it's a challenging one. Who do you speak to? Pretty much our policy team comes out for feedback, Carlton. They're always trying to set policies. We follow, from my point of view, operational team, my team can only do what the policies and procedures are in place for notification and engagement. And if you have some ideas, and we want to work towards more closely with the local iwis and stuff, so there is a program in place that the policy team is working to engage with. Just as a background for your knowledge, it's just the people who are leading it are currently away.
Kia ora for that, and thanks for the honest answers, both of you. And I know that both of you are probably the best people to be dealing with the issues, but we also have a burning desire to get involved, and we don't feel like we're in a position, especially as treaty partner, to wait for annual policy reviews and make submissions. We want direct engagement, and we're ready for that engagement now. We do have some ideas, and we think there's some risk assessments that are not being done that benefit this country biosecurity wise, and are weighted to that, our ideas, not so heavily weighted to economic impacts of dealing with biosecurity risks. So the quicker you can organize us a meeting with the policy team and the likes of yourselves, because policies teams shouldn't make policies without the advice of the likes of yourself and others. Just like you can't act without their policy, they shouldn't write policy without your knowledge and advice, and ours. So that's my request to you, boss.
We're working on it, Carlton, just to let you know, behind the scene.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I've taken up too much time.
Yeah, I know our senior leaders are attempting to come up. They keep getting foiled, but they should be coming up to talk to you guys. And Our directorate itself is in the infancy of developing a more formal process about improving our engagement with our treaty partners. And our team actually flagged the marine international vessel spaces of high importance and priority to sort of speed up that figuring out how the engagement will work and you know, balancing it and all that sort of stuff. So it's definitely coming. And yeah, we're excited to start that conversation.
Build up. Questions from audience. How long have we got, Lisa?
We're already 5 minutes over.
Oh,
So
well,
no
there we
time.
go. There we go. But any burning questions from the audience? How is there's one question here, ballast waters and biosecurity risk. How are ballast waters treated?
Ballast water.
It's currently managed by our colleagues in Maritime New Zealand, but we also partner with it. Abigail, do you?
So ballast water got moved into a convention under the International Maritime Organization. So what that meant is that responsibility now falls on our Port State Authority, which is Maritime New Zealand. But obviously they're not in terms of the knowledge base, they're not the biosecurity experts. So we kind of fall into this situation. We're still screening them as biosecurity, and we kind of make decisions together where we inform them of biosecurity risk and things like that. But essentially, the convention meant that vessels have to move away from exchange, which is where they dump out their ballast and take on new ballast for a certain amount of time in open waters. And now they have onboard treatment systems. I'm not actually too privy to the specific type of treatment that they use, but essentially it means that once the ballast is taken on, it's continually treated within the tanks to neutralize any biosecurity and also health risks that can come from ballast water as well.
You raise a good issue there. Jurisdiction was the work between MPI and Maritime New Zealand, and maybe it's a good agency to look at for another forum. Hui is Maritime New Zealand, how and what role they play in all of this as well. Chris and I are both members of the OPAC advisory committee, and so yeah, I think we'll put that on the drawing board. Another good agency to engage with on this issue. But yeah, Chris just put on the chat around MPI running a series of roundtable workshops, on-farm biosecurity. Will the outcomes of this review be spliced with biosecurity policy at likely source location, ports and harbours? Can either of you answer that question?
I'm not a part of that. I think that's maybe a higher up question.
It's yeah, as you know, Carlton, MPI's quite a wide branch, and it looks like agriculture services side of our policy, but we can have a look into it. I know these are some podcasts MPI has been working on as well. We'll just do some more fact finding and pass it on to Lisa.
Yep, thank you very much. Any other burning questions before we time out? And we have your guys' details and contact numbers. If anyone wants to get in touch with our speakers, please contact Lisa, and we'll try and make that happen. Once again, thank you all for coming, and a big thank you to our speakers. And just so people know, our relationships and our experience with everyone that's been our speakers today. We are very privileged to have these people engaging with us. They are vital in the whole system, biosecurity system. And once again, we're lucky to have a relationship and have them so committed to our kaupapa and coming along and sharing their experience with us. So again, thanks to our speakers, and I can't wait till we catch up again sometime shortly, whether it's a forum meeting or just a catch up, guys. But nā mihi ki a koutou, nā mihi ki a tātou te whakameninga. Big acknowledgements to our audience again today. A lot of dedicated people here on our forum meetings, and a lot of relationship building going on as an outcome of these forum meetings. So nā mihi ki a tātou katoa. I'll just finish us off with a karakia, and hopefully see everybody home safely. No reira e te atua, mātou nei inoi anō ki a koe, ko iti tō mātou nei hui huingi i tēnei rā, no reira, me whakatapu mātou i rungi i tō mātou nei hoki ngā atu ki ngā kāinga maha, ki ngā whānau maha o mātou. Mātou inoi ki a koe, ki a tiaki mai mātou hiki te kaupapa, arehina mai mātou i arotia mātou nei haerenga i rungi i tēnei kaupapa. E no reira tēnei te tuku whakawhetai ki a koe e te atua, ki a tau ki a tātou katoa, te atu whai o tō tātou ari ke a heu karaiti, te aroha o te atua, te whiwhinga teitanga ki te wairua tapu ake ake. Āmeni. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, TMBC
Thank you.
members.
Thanks, Carlton.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Carlton. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone.
You did.
Bye now.